Your hair looks amazing.
Thank you.
Okay, here we go.
What up, Mike? Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 1718 of Toronto Mic'd, proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. Yes, we are open, an award-winning podcast from Marianas, hosted by FOTM El Grego. Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. Get your butts to Christie Pitts this summer for the best baseball in the city, outside the dome. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. Building Toronto Skyline, a podcast and book from Nick Iones, sponsored by Fusion Corp Construction Management Inc. And Ridley Funeral Home, pillars of the community since 1921. Today, making their Toronto Mic debut, it's the authors of When Canadian Punks Took Over the World. It's Adam Feibel and Matt Bobkin. Welcome, Adam. Welcome, Matt.
Oh, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us over.
I just said welcome, Matt.
Yeah, people have called me that before, you know? Not the
Welcome,
first.
Matt. Okay, that's could be worse. Okay. Honestly, pleasure to meet you both. I read When Canadian Punks Took Over the World when I first received it many, many months ago. And then I don't know what happened. I got busy, I got distracted, and I completely forgot to actually invite you both over to chat about it. Of course I want to chat about it, and so I really appreciate you guys being here.
Yeah, no worries. And just to clarify, the book is called In Too Deep.
Oh, you know what?
In Too Deep, When Canadian Punks Took Over the World.
You know what? Oh my God. Okay, let me fix this right now. In Too
worries.
Deep, of course, like the Sum 41 song. In Too Deep, When Canadian, because people are going to buy the wrong book. Okay, there's another book out there called When Canadian Punks Took Over the World. It's about the Vile Tones. So.
R.I.P.
Well, let's start there, and then we'll get into it. And I pulled some songs, and I want to get to know you better. I want to talk about like why did you write this book and what it's about, and then touch on some of these bands you talk about. But like the first question, I'm sure you get this often, but like, what is punk? Because maybe you speak for yourselves, because I mentioned the Vile Tones, and I do want to touch on Stephen Leckie and the Vile Tones, and that takes us back to the late 70s, early 80s. But like, what is punk?
We were asked this before, and I went on this massive
You got 90 minutes. Go.
tangent. I'm going to make it more succinct this time and say that it's with all the history and the different things and the subgenres of subgenres of subgenres. Punk rock is 4 chords and an attitude.
It really is about the attitude, right?
Yeah, for me, punk is a reaction. Throughout the decades, if you have like the early punk, the Clash, the CBGB scene, and you have hardcore in the 80s, and then pop punk in the 90s, 2000s, and then the stuff that the kids are putting out today, it's all looking at the world and saying something's got to change and getting aggressive about it. And so even though it sounds different, I think the ethos is similar.
Because a lot of people think a punk, they think that is a sound. Like, oh, it's what that Sex Pistols guitar thing. Like, it's an actual sound. But punk is it's an attitude.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. I find, if anything, like, because Adam and I get pushback. We got a lot of pushback when we announced the book, just because they said, oh, Sum 41, Avril Lavigne, that's not punk music. And right. I think that Some in particular bears way more resemblance to, like, the Clash, Sex Pistols, than, like, I think hardcore in the 80s really created this tribalism. Mm-hmm. Where it's like that is what people I think associate with punk, just like the like lo-fi grungy nature, but like original punk music is very clean and melodic sounding.
Mm-hmm, that's true. So like, and I think the different waves of punk rock, kind of were, again, like you said, Matt, a reaction to each other. Like original the things that were called punk, and of course no one at the time was calling it that. It just got called that in the its origins in the 70s. Yeah, it was it was very melodic. It was very similar to just rock and roll music. But yeah, it had more of an attitude. It had more grit. It had a bit more speed.
Sure.
And then hardcore came in and just blew it all up, way louder, way more aggressive, way more angry, way faster. And then as a reaction to that, it's like you take that speed and aggression, and then in the 90s with, you know, bands like Green Day and Known Effects, let's make it more melodic again. Let's make it more poppy. And so they did that, and then it's kind of constantly giving and taking in terms of those kind of different sides of what we associate with the punk rock sound.
Yeah, because we recently lost Stephen Leckie. I heard the rest in peace. We say shout out to Ridley Funeral Home on this show. So shout out to Ridley Funeral Home. We lost Stephen Leckie like last week. He's the founding member and singer for the Vile Tones. And as a result, you know, I've been playing some Vile Tones and talking about the Vile Tones. You know, a lot of people listening don't know a Vile Tones song and aren't sure who is Stephen Leckie, who are the Vile Tones. So I did a whole episode called Who Was Stephen Leckie? But there's very little, I don't hear a lot of similarities between what the Vile Tones were recording and what Avril Lavigne was recording. So like Avril has that attitude that puts her in the punk bucket.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you know, with Stephen Leckie, you know, what he represented, calling himself Nazi dog, you know, all that kind of iconography. I mean, you know, you look at Avril Lavigne, she said, okay, I'm a teenage girl in the pop world. I want to make music. And all of the young women at the time, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, were all dressing up. You know, they all wanted to be the next Madonna. They were all put in this mold, and she could not be controlled. That is so punk to me.
Okay, we're going to get into Avril, a bunch of the bands you talk about. So I'm going to just shout out bands or artists that get their own chapter in this fine book, which is actually called Into Deep. I don't know who spread this bad rumor. It was called When Canadian Punks Took Over the World. That's like after the colon, okay?
I mean, that's better SEO, frankly. There's no other book called When Canadian Punks Took Over the World. If you search Into Deep, it's a Jack Reacher novel as well, unfortunately, yeah.
Oh yeah, that is bad SEO. You should have reversed it.
Yeah.
When Canadians Punk Took Over the World, Into Deep, okay?
All right. Well, when we revise it, we'll deluxe edition, 10 years.
So I mentioned Ridley Funeral Home. So really quickly, I want to give you guys a measuring tape for making the trek. This is courtesy of Ridley Funeral Home, who have a great podcast called Life's Undertaking. So shout out to Ridley Funeral Home. Measure what you wish.
Thank you.
The success of Canadian punk bands.
I'll measure the trek from Harvard Village.
I was going to say, I said this to Adam before you arrived, because where he came from, I said, oh, you should have biked. And then I realized you'd be dripping wet. Like, you'd be like, where's the shower?
It's like 40,000 degrees outside in Toronto right now.
I
Sun
need to
beating
install
down.
a shower down here, but I'm worried that maybe you won't be able to like stand up fully. You'd have to be bent over for a shower down here. So let's establish who you guys are before we dive deep into deep. Who are you guys? So let's start with Adam, since he arrived first. Adam, give us a little background, who you are, who are you to write a book about Canadian punk?
So, I mean, Matt and I have both been music writers for, I think, over 10 years now. And I grew up in Ottawa, and I was kind of part of the punk rock scene there during the late 2000s, early to mid 2010s, you know, playing in bands my whole youth and in my early 20s, and I've lived in Toronto for the last 10 years. And Matt and I met from working. I've been a freelance contributor for Exclaim ever since I came here to Toronto.
That's
and
cool.
Matt was my editor for several years.
Matt does look like the editor of the two of you, as I look at him.
It's the glasses and the full beard.
Yeah.
So Exclaim, I was reading up, who are these music journalists? Okay, Bandcamp, Vice, the National Post, and the Toronto Star, a couple of mainstream media outlets right there. So you guys have been writing about music forever. So what made you want to write this book?
So when I was coming up, freelancing for Exclaim, for Vice, I wasn't writing about pop punk or punk rock at all. I grew up. I grew up watching much music in the early 2000s, obsessed with it, and that's how I got into all those bands. But then by the time I was in high school, I was like the quintessential indie rock guy, which is the bearded, bespectacled, patterned shirt guy you see before you and that you can hear.
Handsome man, right, Adam?
Yes, very much so.
Well, Adam's handsome too. Like, you guys are both handsome
absolutely.
men.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And so, so when I was at Exclaim, I was indie rock guy, and then became an editor there a few years in, and then around the time Adam and I were turning 30, we struck up a friendship because we loved Billy Talent and were being vocal about it. We hadn't written about Billy Talent for Exclaim ever, but we were talking about it on Twitter at the time, and then I looked through the Exclaim archives and realized that Exclaim hated Billy Talent, and critics writ large hated Billy Talent. This is a band I'd loved since I was a kid. And then over the course of a year, Adam wrote a story, a critical reappraisal of Billy Talent for their second album, Billy Talent 2.
Sure.
And then we realized that extended to all of these Canadian punk bands that were mainstream famous but didn't get any critical love. And us as critics for about a decade at that point decided, you know what, now's our time. Let's give it a shot. There's this big story here about the trove of Canadian pop punk, mainstream punk music. How did Canada get so much success on the world stage? That is not something that comes often for homegrown Canadian artists. And so we noticed that this double issue here of there's all these Canadian punk artists that have kind of gone unheralded by critics, and where did this wealth of Canadian punk come from? And so we decided to tackle it in a book because it was this giant idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it all kind of ties together, and I love to see how all the pieces fit together. So you mentioned Billy Talent. We're going to get into Billy Talent shortly because I'm like you guys. I didn't know about this critical backlash. So I was unaware that the critics hated Billy Talent. I thought they sounded great.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
so
we
what's wrong with these critics? Like they hate us having a good time here. What's going on?
I mean, I have
Well,
some
it
theories.
was the same, as we went along and realized that there was this huge movement in the 2000s of Canadian artists being part of a, movement in pop culture at the time when punk rock and emo like ascended to that higher plane of being all over MTV and all over the radio and Warped Tour being just like the biggest thing ever. We realized that that the others, Sum 41, Avril Lavigne, Simple Plan, they all had lots of haters as well. And that didn't, we set out to tell the story ultimately of how each of these artists got from, the suburbs of Montreal or of Ajax, Ontario, or of St. Catharines and became these kind of world-conquering, globe-trotting artists. But part of that also was just, giving some long overdue, credit to and counter that critical negativity that and fans too. Like the Punk Police have been around for a long time, and it wasn't.
Oh, we're gonna hear from the Punk Police when I can tell you because I do a lot of episodes with the Al Nolans, like the real heads from like the scene back. David Quinton Steinberg from the Mods. I could Cleve Anderson, who was in Battered Wives. Like we can go on and on. I just had Liz Worth on to talk because she wrote the book on that late 70s, early 80s scene that we talked about for a moment. And we did the Vile Tones episode, tribute to Stephen Leckie with Kire Paputz, whose dad was Chris Haight, founding member of the Vile Tones. And by the way, I'm glad that all these bands we're going to talk about, nobody took a nickname that had the word Nazi in it. So I think that was a good progress.
Yeah.
There's no Nazi dogs in this group here.
No.
Okay. So I'll shout out quickly the bands, artists that get a heavy spotlight in the book In Too Deep, which I do recommend. I read it twice. And then I'll explain why I'm glad you wrote this book. So Gob, Sum 41, Avril Lavigne, Simple Plan, Billy Talent, Silverstein, Alexisonfire, Fefe Dobson, Marianas Trench. These are the artists that get like a major spotlight, but get touch on a whole bunch of other artists from the scene. Mm-hmm. And here's why I'm glad you wrote the book. I've been doing this show a long time. 12, 13 years. And this is episode 1718. And I love music, so I gravitate towards, talking to musicians and talking about music. That's why you guys are here right now. But I notice I'll touch on the 80s quite a bit. I'll do an 80s thing because that's when I was kind of growing up. And I will touch on 2000s, not as much as I probably should. But I really live in the 90s. Like my focus is on the 90s bands. Like let's talk Rusty, Lowest of the Low. Like let's Killjoys. Let's get into that scene right there. I don't know, Sloan. Like this is kind of where I live. So reading your book really filled in a lot of cracks for me because I kind of got distracted. I started having kids. I stayed in the 90s when the 2000s arrived. Like I really appreciate that this scene that I did. You couldn't miss Avril Lavigne. You couldn't miss Sum 41. But you guys really did a good job talking to people from the scene and connecting those dots, which personally I crave. I want to connect these dots. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for reading it twice, and thank you for
twice.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
read
so
anything
great.
twice.
We appreciate that.
And
That's
I mean,
awesome.
the research was like a point of pride in this as well. Was getting, digging up these stories that may have been kind of an underbaked Wikipedia page and blowing them up into the full story that they are.
So I mentioned I like to play a little music. I know I can't play music on the show. I do it anyways because I am a rebel without a cause.
That's punk.
I'm so, you know what? That's why I'm fiercely independent. You're in a dank basement. I think you asked, do I need a coaster for my coffee, Alex? Adam, sorry. Alex, can I call you Alex? Is that okay? No.
You could. I have been called Alex
close,
before.
Alex, so close. So you asked, do I need a coaster for my Tim Hortons coffee here? And I almost laughed out loud. I'm like, do you know where you are, Adam? You don't need a coaster here. Okay. So I'm going to hit a lot of tunes, but I need to invite both of you and everyone listening to an event that's happening in 2 days. We're recording on Tuesday, June 24, 2025. And on Thursday, June 26, 2025, it's TMLX 19. That's the 19th Toronto Mike Listener Experience. And listeners, guests, we're going to gather at Great Lakes Brewery, which is 30 Queen Elizabeth Boulevard, down the street from the Costco in South Etobicoke, not too far from Royal York and Queensway. We're going to gather. Great Lakes Brewery will buy you your first beer. You two gents, before you leave, I have fresh craft beer around the corner I'm going to give you. So you're going to bring home some Great Lakes beer for you,
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Amazing.
But on Thursday, you get your first on the house, and then Palma Pasta, the most delicious Italian food on the planet. I'm even including Italy in there, okay? It's better here in Mississauga. They're going to feed everybody. So come hungry. If you two showed up, I'm telling you, there'd be some gob talk at the TMLX 19. But you're invited from 6 to 9 p.m., TMLX 19. You guys ready to get to it?
Mike, has anyone
Let's
ever
do it.
called you the Nardwar of Toronto just with the gifts?
You know what? So there's a blind spot. Let's touch on this right now because 1236, who is a FOTM Hall of Famer, sent me a clip of Nardwar throwing out the first pitch at a Cubs game. This happened, I guess, recently. Okay. I threw out the first pitch at a Toronto Maple Leafs baseball game at Christie Pitts, and I was quite honored to get that opportunity. You two are getting
Oh, sweet.
history book of Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. They play at Christie Pitts.
Go see them.
Awesome to hear that because no ticket required. You enjoy it. You sit on the hill. You get a hot dog or a hot dog, if you will. You get a Leafs lager. You enjoy the game. I urge everybody to check out Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. But Nardwar, I think when he gets a national spotlight, which I think is much music, it's in the 2000s. And at that point, I've moved on from much. I watched so much in the mid to late 80s and throughout the 90s. I watched so much music, but I aged out by the time Nardwar got there. And I literally don't know this guy. It's a complete blind spot.
Nardwar is one of those people that people don't realize is Canadian because a lot of my American friends who are around my age, they all know Nardwar. All the Gen Zers know Nardwar. He's huge on he's Twitch streaming and he's massive on
Cubs
YouTube.
game. That's Chicago, so you know he's not Canada famous.
Yeah. Oh no, he's international famous. We actually tried to get Nardwar to write the foreword for the book. And I sent him a bunch of emails. My old bosses at Exclaim are pals with Nardwar through the Mint Records scene in Vancouver. And they told me to send him to mail a letter to him. And so I did. I went to the post office. I mailed him a letter. And I got a Christmas postcard back from him saying, hey, sorry, I can't do it, but here's a postcard. So shout out to Nardwar.
Okay, well, shout out to Nardwar. A blind spot, but that's on me because I checked out a much, I think, just around that time. But Nardwar, a Vancouver guy, right?
Yes,
Yep.
very much.
All right, so let's get to the tunes here. Maybe later in this chat, you mentioned writing it's like a piece of snail mail to somebody. I did that for somebody, and I want to talk about him a little later.
Cool.
It's not really music related, but here we go.
So charming to look on your face when you're rising, finding something I just can't do now. I've been around and by your heart, I'm looking for you just to shed some light on my day. Feels like ages since I've been on your way. I've been caught up with a handful of new sensations. I hear you calling for me out in the night, but it's all bad. And I know that
a little taste of Vancouver's gob. Let's start here. Your book actually starts here as well, but you mentioned Nardwuar, you mentioned the scene. Again, we're not going to read the book for the listener. We're just going to touch on some of the bands, and I have a few questions, and people got to get in too deep to get the deep dive here, and it's worth it, man. It's very dense, and there's lots of great stories, and a lot of dots are connected. But tell me about gob.
So we argue that gob are Canada's first real big pop punk band. I mean, when you have Green Day that emerges in the early 90s out of Southern California, gob up in Vancouver, so pretty quick drive up. They are the ones really carrying that torch, saying that, Vancouver's a hardcore city. We got DOA, SNFU, ends up relocating there.
Dayglows.
Pardon?
Oh, Dayglows.
Yeah.
They might be Victoria, actually. But, BC, it was very hardcore scene there.
Yeah, Canada's hardcore stronghold, I'd say, for sure. And so...
although, Biff Naked lives here now.
Yeah, that's true.
Just want to point that out. She's a Mimico.
Okay, I mean, everyone comes to Toronto eventually. and so... Gob says, no, it's not those guys. Like, they're great, but we want to make the melodic stuff. They like Screeching Weasel and just the Fat Wreck scene and all that stuff.
Lookout Records,
right.
Green Days. They were just obsessed with that label.
Sure. Right. Yeah, and so they're carrying that torch in Vancouver, and they're like the only ones. And they're kind of outcast in the scene for a bit, and then within a couple of years, I mean, they get big on Much Music.
Well, this is where I discovered gob, because I'm still watching Much Music at this point, and there was a lot of gob on Much Music.
Was it Soda? Because Soda was that was the first big video that everyone
there were a few, like when I was going to pull a song, like I was going to pick one song from select artists. I did go through a bunch, and I did recognize a whole whack of gob. And this one felt like, okay, this one kind of fits that sound. This is the one I'm gonna play.
And they kind of figured out how to play the Much Music game to their benefit. And they had short songs, so they could kind of stick on at the end of the hour, boost up the CanCon percentage.
That's the song 2 trick, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so they didn't get as big as a Sum 41, for example, but they got as big as as mainstream as a punk rock band, I think, had gotten to that point. And so they kind of set up, that chapter tells their story, but it also introduces all these concepts of how hard it is for Canadian artists to get out of Canada to get play.
Yeah. And a continuing theme in the book, and I'm always interested in how the cake gets baked, but it's like getting screwed over by record labels. And the Fefe Dobson story, for example, and it's just like, okay, we're dropping you now. And like a whole bunch of, it just seems like the game is rigged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it doesn't favor the artist.
Well, and one of the things we wanted to do with the book was it's not 9 separate chapters that you could read at any order. We wanted to tell a singular story, this kind of rise and fall of this Canadian punk dominance. And part of that is, gob, I think, is this almost cautionary tale of like, careful what you wish for, and that like they just got burned at every turn, and then they finally make it big. They signed to a major label in the early 2000s in the wake of Sum 41, and then they get dropped basically instantly.
Mm-hmm. Right. A lot of cases of that throughout. And I mean, I have been told, and I think we set it up this way as well, that you can just read, select chapters if you care about one more than the other, but there is definitely a narrative.
Why would you do that? Like, just read it in order.
There is a narrative through line. Yeah.
And we want the people who only like maybe one or two of these bands to be like, what's Fefe Dobson doing here? What's Marianas Transfers, Avril Lavigne doing here? And then to go in and then realize the significance of these artists, because I think they all paint a single picture.
Like there's an artist that's got a chapter, we'll get to it later, I literally know nothing about. Like there is one artist on this list I know nothing about, so it's just a blind spot. I've got a bunch of blind spots here. But so an FOTM is a friend of Toronto Mic'd. You two are now FOTM, so welcome to the fraternity.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
I'm going to just drop names of FOTMs that seem to play a role in some of these band stories. So for gob, and I dug that song listening to it in the headphones now here in 2025. It's still digging it. But what role does FOTM Jason Priestley play in the rise of gob?
Jason directed the video for which video was it?
Was it that one? No, it's not.
No, it wasn't that
one.
Okay. It was one before that, from their second album. And
Terry David Mulligan starred in it.
Well, there's the other FOTM I wanted to ask you about, Terry David Mulligan, because you mentioned Much Music. Well, I can't remember. Is Terry still involved with Much West at this time? Like, does he still have the pull at Much Music at this time?
Yeah, I believe so. He was because he was still in like around like the early Sum 41 days. I feel like he was there until maybe 2000, 2001.
Okay, he was always the older VJ guy hanging around there. But
He's so cool. He's still so cool. He's one of the first people we talked to for the book, and he is really lovely.
And he rode for Gob. You know, he just loved the music, and he loved hanging out with the guys, that they were just like these fun guys to hang out with. And he was like, I'm just gonna boost you, you know, like I'm gonna do what I can to get you on Much and to just help you because I like your band.
So this past weekend, my third born played in this tournament in Scarborough, a legendary, they call it an international tournament. I don't know if that's true, but they call it that. But it's the Robbie, okay? So the Robbie, it's for cystic fibrosis. It's a wonderful event. And my kid was in a soccer tournament as part of the Robbie. And the final line of the Billboard Hot 100 #1 hit by Scarborough's Bare Naked Ladies is... Birchmount Stadium, home of the Robbie. Like, this is the line that Stephen Page sings. Like, so there's a Billboard Hot 100 hit that shouts out this Scarborough tournament, which is mind-blowing. But the reason I'm bringing up Bare Naked Ladies, who obviously predate your era here, and they're not quite punk, are they? But Bare Naked Ladies, they got an attitude over there, okay. But Bare Naked Ladies also received great, they were lifted by Jason Priestley, who got them on the Peach Pit on 90210, and then directed, I think it was The Old Apartment maybe, but he directed, I think it was Old Apartment, but the role of Jason Priestley in helping Bare Naked Ladies from Scarborough is almost replicated with Vancouver's Gob.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he really rode for these Canadian bands. And yeah, shout out Jason Priestley. We tried to talk to him, but
you know what? I could have helped you because FOTM Gear Joyce has Jason Priestley on speed dial, and I know he loves talking about punk.
Expanded edition. We'll do it in 10 years.
Yeah, for sure. That's the rule. Okay, so again, I don't want you guys here for 3 hours here, so I'm just going to move on to a bigger band, at least internationally. Maybe not in Vancouver, but a bigger band. Welcome to the stage from Ajax, Ontario. This is Sum 41. Woo!
I always forget how much that intro sounds like Beastie Boys.
Oh, no. So I actually disliked this at first because it felt like a knockoff of Beastie Boys, and I was a big Beastie Boys fan.
Absolutely.
It's so Beastie Boys.
Man, every time I listen to this song now, I'm like, how could this not be a hit? Especially for the time and place. Like, it's so huge, regardless of even whether you particularly like it or not, or if it's your thing. It's just got like they talk about star quality. It's a song that just embodies some
and
star
that
quality.
chorus is gigantic. That chorus is huge, and it has nothing to do with Beastie Boys. And the fact that it melds so seamlessly together really just shows the brilliance that these guys had in the studio as like teenagers.
At age 19 or whatever they were.
And they were huge. I like this part too. Like, it's quite a single. Like, so this was not a hit internationally. Fat Lip.
Fat Lip, yeah.
Okay, so what? Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Fat Lip was.
I thought you mentioned it,
no.
how could this not? Oh, I see.
It was. I was just saying it was
but like
destined
undeniable.
for it,
No,
right?
This was their breakout.
Yeah.
Like if it had a name that was probably a little more evocative, we probably would have called the book that. We had to go with it too deep, but this is their breakthrough. We couldn't call the book Fat Lip.
Well, you know, the sequel could be called Fat Lip.
That's true.
When we get Jason Priestley on the line.
Excellent.
For sure. So I want to ask you about another band. Again, this is a little controversial because of allegations made by Derek regarding Grignori. But Treble Charger, can we just talk about the role of Treble Charger in the rise of Sum 41?
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we kind of discovered through the research was that Greg Norrie, who managed Sum 41 through their rise to fame, lead singer of Treble Charger, he was not mentioned a ton when we were talking to the band's publicist and their A&R rep. And so I believe, like, we kind of realized that maybe his role was a little overinflated in the press. That they had a crack team of people, like Parkside Mike Renault, who worked at Aquarius Records, Joanne Setrington, their first big publicist, and they're still in the band's orbit, and they were brought up a lot. Mike McCarty, I think, also, who was the publisher of EMI Music Publishing Canada, who signed them to a publishing deal when they were in their teens through Mark Costanzo of Len, and these are all names that the band members bring up still to this day, and that each other, they're all still friends and they're all still close to each other. And so with Greg, we realized he wasn't actually like that big in the story that we were getting in the interviews and also through our research.
But I mean, they would likely be playing down the role of Greg, considering what Derek has alleged.
I mean, the way the story goes is that
it's complicated.
A lot of these people also, I mean, this was all before the allegations came out. And so it's unclear who knew what, who was saying what for what reasons. But ultimately, that is like the story that we were hearing and the story that we were telling. Greg just wasn't involved all that much.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And you mentioned Len there for a moment. So where does Len play into this? And I'm trying to remember, is that late 90s? When was the Steal My Sunshine?
I think that was 97.
97. Okay.
And so Derek Whibley was in the room when Mark Costanzo was writing Steal My Sunshine, which the inspiration of which was Brendan Canning of Head, future Broken Social Scene co-founder.
Sure. And FOTM.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, he played a song in a DJ set, Brendan did, and Mark Costanzo turned that into the beat of Steal My Sunshine, and Derek was around.
More,
exactly.
Which is catchy as fuck.
Yeah, although that's like the one bar in the entire song that sounds like that, and Mark just heard it and flipped it. The rest of the song doesn't really sound like it. It's amazing.
There's a moment in it where you can hear they loop it, but in they have a radio version of Steal My Sunshine, and then they have the album cut. And on the album cut, you get that, I almost think it's a Canadian thing or something, where people talk, although Weezer does it too, but the talking at the beginning, like you hear a conversation, and Canning is one of the voices chatting at the beginning of the album version of Steal My Sunshine.
Yeah.
More of a fun match. Yeah. Now, only because I was hanging with him the other day, and he's going to be at TMLX 19. So if you guys showed up at TMLX 19, you could hang with the Snowman. But does Snow, I know Snow was doing stuff with Greg Noy. Does Snow play, and Len, does Snow have a role in this story at all? I'm just trying to get him in the story.
He's not in the book.
Not in our story, or not our story, but not in the story that we wrote, the chapter. But I believe there is an Easter egg that, a story about an early version of Into Deep that was kind of like a reggae
I asked Snow
mashup
about
with
this.
Snow.
Yeah, so for your next book, I asked explicitly Snow about this version. So yeah, there's an alternate version or something with Snow on it.
Yeah, and which the story was broken by the Blink 155 podcast, which is co-hosted by Sam Sutherland, who hosted our book launch. It's kind of an album launch, though. That was the vibe at the Rivoli. And also my old Exclaim co-worker, Josiah Hughes. So, it's all connected.
Everybody knows each other.
Well, it's a small world anyway, but...
Super connected, if you will.
But this
Shout out to
Canadian
Brian
music... Yeah, right. This Canadian music world, this is why I liked your book, because it did fill in some gaps, and then you can see how... And I took a few notes on how things are connected, but this is such a small... infrastructure, this Canadian music universe, but it's good to see a band like Sum 41 sort of become globally big, where Gob didn't quite reach those heights.
Yeah, I mean, Gob got close, and it had a bit of a breakthrough with, especially in the EA Sports NHL games, which is how many people discovered them, as well as just kind of punk rock in general. But yeah, Sum 41 is the moment where they go to number one on MTV on the Total Request Live, and after that it Fat Lip becomes this huge hit, and then they have Into Deep, and that becomes a huge hit, and then the next year they make a second album and it's huge as well, and they're just a major part of the early to mid 2000s, and they're also just indicative of a point in pop culture where punk rock is now mainstream. And it had breakthroughs with Green Day and the Offspring in the 90s, but
Blink 182.
Yeah, and Blink 182 by 99. But at this point, with Blink-182 in there, and with all these other bands coming up like Sum 41, it's now like it's a whole thing. It's not just one band here or there. It's a huge movement.
Well, that 1994 1-2 punch of Dookie. Do you guys say Dookie or Dookie?
I say Dookie.
This came up recently.
Yeah, I think
Dookie.
I'm trying to remember. A friend of mine razzed me about it, and I don't remember which one I actually do. I've done both over the years. I think I said Dookie, and he
I
gave
say
me
Dookie. and
I've
then-
only ever heard it pronounced Dookie.
Okay, well, you know what? It's probably Dookie.
But I've changed over the years. I mean, I've been listening to that record a long time. So
So Dookie and Smash. The
Doki. I call it Doki. It's Dutch.
Those two back to back kind of, it's sort of this punk pop thing is now mainstream. So let's go. Let's fucking go, as they say. But I love the fact that in this small world that the lead singer, Derek Whibley of Sum 41, will end up married to this woman right here.
She did ballet. What more can I say? He wanted her. She'd never tell. Secretly she wanted him as well. And all of her friends stuck up their nose. And they had a problem with his baggy clothes. He was a skater boy. She said, see you later, boy. He wasn't good enough for her. She had a pretty face, but her hair was off in space. She needed to come back down to earth. 5 years from now.
Complicated came first, right?
Yeah,
The second single.
It did. But I was at a family bat mitzvah recently, and this lit up the dance floor. The 13-year-old girl, 12-year-old girls are still losing it to Skater Boy, and they know all the words.
Are they dressing like Avril? That was quite a look there.
Not at the bat mitzvahs. I don't think that ever. I'm sure there must have been at least one Avril-themed bat mitzvah at some point, but I doubt there are Jewish parents in the world that would let their daughter wear the tank and tie to a bat mitzvah. It's a bit of a holy occasion.
Avril Lavigne
I think it'd be
comes
cool.
from Napanee, Ontario.
That's right.
Which I know because if I'm driving to Ottawa, I'll see like a sign for it.
En route. The en route, yeah. No, I've done that drive many times, and shout out Napanee.
So who was bigger? Avril was bigger than Sum 41, right? In the global stage.
Easily the biggest artist of the nine. We did a little like Google Trends mapping, world mapping, and we had to take Avril out of it because she just, whatever color she was in the Google Trends map, she just floods the world. She is far and away a bigger artist than anyone.
So what I want to ask about Avril, so again, a lot of great detail in the book about, teenage Avril and trying to shape her sound and what she would sound like and everything. But can you just talk about the role of The Matrix? And I'm not talking about the Keanu Reeves movie. It gets confusing there. But because the three big bangers from Let's Go are all Matrix productions, right?
Let Go, yeah.
Let Go. What did I call it? Let's Go. Okay, Let Go. Let's get that right. Okay, The Matrix.
Yeah, so that was a three-person writing team of a husband and wife and a friend who were brought in after Avril had kind of bounced around a bunch of different songwriting teams that the label had set up with her, and that weren't really working out, largely because Avril was pushing back against the type of music that they were expecting her to make, which was like a Faith Hill type, because she came from singing it in church and at country festivals and town halls in Napanee,
Opening for Shania Twain.
Yeah, and there was this image of her as this person that she was going to be the next Faith Hill or maybe the next Shania Twain. But by that point, and she's still 15 at this point, and she's only just discovering what her personal sound and personal identity is, and she's become a skater. She's hanging out at skate parks. She's listening to punk rock bands and even rock and metal bands, getting into Green Day and NoFX and also Metallica and System of a Down and stuff like that. And so she's like, by the time signed to a $1 million major label deal, she's like, oh, I don't want to be Faith Hill. And so she's bouncing around songwriters a lot, pushing back quite a bit. And The Matrix is the one that kind of unlocked a bit of a sound that was a compromise between what she wanted to do and what and the label wanted hits, you know, they wanted pop hits. And so you get Complicated, which is not really a punk rock song, but Skater Boy is a pop punk banger. And, you know, I'll stand behind that 1,000%. And that's, you know, that's where you get that. And then after that, you know, she doesn't want anything to do with any of those songwriters. And on her second album, she's like, I'm gonna choose my own songwriters, and I get to, because this album did amazing. So
well, I'm gonna get to some of those songwriters for sure. One of whom was in this basement just late last year. I had a great chat with her. But so the three big bangers. What's the name of that ballad? The third one that was a huge hit.
I'm With You.
I'm With You. It's a nice song actually. But they're all, you know,
It's
those
beautiful.
three, all three of those. But ask me to name a fourth song from Let Go. Go ahead. Okay. So
Do you want me to?
yeah, well, you don't have to do it.
You gotta listen to Losing Grip. You got it's the
yeah.
first trap on the record, and
Okay.
it's massive.
I think I think almost all my Avril exposure was Much Music. I think that's so those three big bangers. But they were all the Matrix, and she didn't want to work with the Matrix again for the second album. But she did want to work with Chantal Kreviazuk.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, she's married. I kind of like how all these people are connected. I mean, Avril ended up married to the guy from Nickelback, for God's sakes. But like Rain Maida from Our Lady Peace, who's of course still married to Chantal Kreviazuk. You know, they met. Their labels had them meet at a Pearl Jam concert. I got this story from Chantal. But interesting that she wants to work with Chantal because she likes Chantal's music.
Yeah, and I think there's, you know, like at that point she wants to make a rock record, and that's what she makes, and or a pop rock record. And you know, she hooks up with Chantal, and I think because she just, you know, liked her and wanted to work with her, and, you know, liked the kind of creative process and that songwriting process, and it's just like a good collaborator. And so, yeah, you know, she got to, for her second album, she gets to choose who she works with, and so she works with Chantal mostly, as well as Rain, and a couple of other songwriters, like the guy from Evanescence is involved.
Right.
Is that Moody?
Yes.
Ben Moody.
Okay, Ben Moody.
Yeah, and it's I think that quintessential like teenage thing of like she just wanted to, you know, like there's no rhyme or reason as to why Chantal Kreviazuk over, you know, whoever. It's just, it's what she's listening to. It's what she likes, and she has this platform, and she's earned some goodwill from the label.
Absolutely.
And yeah, kudos to her for sticking up for herself.
Glad you're giving her kudos, because I just think the fact that on the first album that she had the ability to like push back in the direction the label, because you know these labels in young artists particularly, this is a teenager. What was she? I don't know what she was. How old was she when she was recording Let Go? 17?
I think
Yeah,
she's
I think so.
15 when she signs the deal, and then she's, you know, 16, 17.
Because I think the first album comes out 2002. I think she's 18 because she's born in 84.
Wow. And then just being able to push it back, and then finding the compromise with the Matrix there, and just kudos to her for having that wherewithal to basically say, no, this is not me. Like I want to be authentic. Yeah.
And then by the time that second record comes around, she's like, well, you know, that's the old Avril. You know, I'm done with the tank top and tie. I'm moving into a different direction. And, you know, yeah, kudos to her.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so again, we're not reading the book here, everybody. So we're just going to touch on a few things that I enjoyed reading about in the book. But there's a band here I never liked. Okay, so I do want to play a bit of this band. I know I'll preface this by saying I never liked this band, but I'm going to play a little bit of this.
I woke up, it was 7, waited till 11 just to figure out that no one would call. I think I've got a lot of friends, but I don't hear from them. What's another night all alone? When you're spending every day on your own, and here it goes. I'm just a kid and life is a nightmare. I'm just a kid, I know that's not fair. Nobody cares 'cause I'm alone and the world is having more fun than me.
All right, let's go to Quebec here. We've been to Vancouver, Ajax, Napanee. Those two cities are in Ontario, of course, and I guess these guys are from just outside Montreal. Simple Plan.
Yeah. Ile Bizarre, Dollar des Ormeaux. Yeah, the suburbs of Montreal.
It's a good accent you got there.
Merci.
Did you go to French immersion?
Adam did. I lived in Quebec for 4 years. I did my undergrad in Montreal.
Okay, my daughter today arrives back from, she's going to McGill, and she's living in Montreal.
My alma mater. Excellent. Excellent. What's she studying?
a business. I know that she let me know that she needed some kind of 98% or something to get into this business program. So I don't know the exact name.
I wasn't in the business program. Not getting any 98s.
Well, I don't know what's going on there, but we got lucky with Michelle, who will be at TMLX 19 on Thursday. Everybody come meet Michelle. She's in town this week here. Actually, her mom turns 50 tomorrow, so she was coming back for that. So I'm going to grab her for TMLX 19. But, all right, so I preface it by saying, I was around for Simple Plan, but I was too old. I'm sure my ears just felt like kids' music. It still does listening to that song. It sounds like a kid's music, but Simple Plan, big deal.
Yeah. Look, this song especially, it is very youthful. It is very, even by pop punk standards, pretty tame, and really draws back on the punk part of pop punk. If you listen to like another big single from that album, "I'd Do Anything," that I will stand behind as one of the best pop punk songs of all time.
Absolutely. So would Mark Hoppus at Blink-182.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I pulled the wrong jam.
Yeah, and I mean, these guys have a long history in punk rock bands, like, really hard, fast skate punk bands, namely Reset, throughout the 90s before, some band drama happens. They break up. A couple of them get back together.
High school band
and form, a new one, Simple Plan, because at that point, they're getting a little more into kind of the poppy alt rock of the late 90s. Chuck and Pierre, the drummer and singer of Simple Plan, having a reunion at a Sugar Ray concert and hashing things out and starting a new band together after a fallout. And so they get a little more personal instead of political with their lyrics, and they get a little more poppy with their music. But these guys know punk rock. They know ball.
Yeah, and one thing for me, like as a music writer, like when I was writing at Exclaim, particularly kind of near the end of my tenure there, I really like to think about beyond the music of like the economic factors of being a musician and just how punishing it is. And so, Pierre and Chuck from Simple Plan, when they were in Reset, they were touring around Canada in a van with the Fat Wreck guys, and they opened for Blink-182 when they were still Blink, and they made no money out of it because their record label had no money and everyone was living on couches. And so this was their kind of pivot to actually make a living making music, and it worked. And it still, I think, honored the punk music they grew up listening to, like Bad Religion. There's a moment in the book where Chuck listens to a Bad Religion song on the radio late at night, and it just like jolts him out of bed and changes his brain, and they go from being a grunge tribute band called Stone Garden to
which you can put together how they came up with that.
Soundgarden.
To making pop punk like Bad Religion. And so I think that that like DNA is still in Simple Plan. And I think they get like an unnecessarily bad rap just because they like did a hard pivot.
Okay, now there's a name I'm going to introduce to our little story here because it's going to tie in nicely with the next band out of Streetsville, which is a fancy way of saying Mississauga, okay? How come we do that why do we do that for Streetsville? We don't do that for other neighborhoods. We would say Mississauga, but when it's Streetsville, we call it like it's its own city. It's just a neighborhood in Mississauga. Why does Streetsville get that extra special attention?
I think because it is, or what, like it was its own, pre-amalgamation was its own thing.
But when was that amalgamation?
Still? Yeah.
Before I was around.
2001, I guess.
The Toronto one is 98. Yeah. But that's not a Mississauga thing.
No? Okay.
No.
I'm getting my Ontario geography wrong.
Here. Yeah. What area did you grow up in? Where did you call home when you were growing up?
Sorry?
Like, are you a Toronto guy?
No, I'm an Ottawa guy.
Oh yeah, that's right. Okay, so
I'm Toronto, and I could tell you the 6. Before Drake called it the 6, I could tell you. But anyway, I remember that amalgamation. It's one of my earliest political memories.
Look, shout out to the 6, and shout out, of course, to Scarborough, home of the Robbie. Okay, so we're still on Simple Plan. I'm just going to introduce a name because he's also an FOTM and a famous name in this country, George Stroumboulopoulos. Like, what role does he play in the rise of Simple Plan?
So George had a radio show on The Edge, Punkorama, and he would let people kind of come and give him a CD and say, okay, here's a new punk song, you got to play it, and he will play it live on the air for the first time. And so someone came into the studio while he was recording Punkorama, gave him a CD of I'd Do Anything, and he played it, and he would turn the song off after 30 seconds and kind of clown the listener or the gift giver on air.
Sure.
And he played I Do Anything and was like, this song is a fucking smash. And then the team at Coalition Music, who were in talks with Simple Plan to manage them.
They had just signed on to manage them,
or they were in the conversation, called him and said, do you think this song is any good? Like, they heard it on the radio, and George said, yeah, this song's a fucking smash, and so they signed them.
Okay, a moment of this song that I didn't pull.
And I wrote this letter in my head, 'cause so many things were left unsaid. But now you're gone, and I can't think straight. This could be the one last chance to make you understand. Yeah, I'd do anything just to hold you in my arms, to try to make you laugh. Somehow I can't put you in the past. I'd do anything.
Okay, so without a doubt, this is a much better song than I'm Just a Kid.
Yeah. Also, shout out to Quebec. I'm a big Quebecophile, and French-Canadian, Simple Plan, Pierre Bouvier, lead singer. And so he is the only member of the band who speaks English with no trace of a French-Canadian accent, because his grandmother was Anglophone. And so, but his approach to songwriting is rooted in English being an additional language for him. And so the way that he constructs songs, the way that he sings, I think that pop punk sneer is all part of his approach. Like, it's all about the sound, which I think is what makes them a great pop punk band.
So there's a cameo appearance by Mark Hoppus here, background vocals. Do you know this?
Of course, we talk about it in the book.
Okay,
You read it twice,
I read it twice, but I forgot that.
It's dense. There's a lot.
Okay, and again, I now will tell you on Thursday, which is 2 days from now, before TMLX 19, we're going to record an episode of Toast, and Bob Willett from Indie 88 and Rob Pruce, who was keyboardist for Spoons, a Burlington band. We'll talk about another one in a minute. But they're going to drop by, and we're going to kick out our favorite songs with cameo appearances in it. So a member, an artist you know who's not in the band makes a cameo appearance in the song, and we're going to kick out our favorite, and this one would have been appropriate. Yeah. But also, Arno Lanni produces this.
Yes,
yeah, of Our Lady Peace and others, but at that point,
Ghost,
big Our Lady Peace
right?
fame.
But
yeah.
Frozen Ghost would be like
was his actual
his big band, and yeah, he definitely played a huge role in Our Lady Peace.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so there's some fun facts for you. And Strombo played a role there. Yeah, we're back to Strombo because he's going to segue nicely, because I'm going to kick out a jam from a band all three of us really like. In fact, this is my favorite band of all the bands in the book. This is my favorite, probably.
Right,
so here we go. Billy Talent from Streetsville, Mississauga, Ontario, Canada.
Yeah, they're also my favorite of the 9 bands that we featured. Actually, when we signed the book deal, the first song I listened to should have been In Too Deep, but it wasn't. It was Try Honesty. It was this one. Mm-hmm. Just put it on, and just that opening guitar is just pure dopamine to my veins.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're all in agreement. I'm disappointed to hear the critics were shitting all over Billy Talent. Come on.
Critics and my cabin mates at summer camp in 2004. I got horrifically bullied because my mom snuck a Billy Talent CD
Of
in my
all
bag.
the bands to get bullied for, like, that just blows my mind because this is a hard rockin' kick-ass band.
I know, and like just growing up and like thinking about it, it doesn't really make any sense. But like also, it would have been anything, you know. I really didn't fit the mold of the camper, and that's fine. But they picked Billy Talent, and it's my supervillain origin story, and now I got this manifesto, right?
And that's
So
how we
let's
got
take
this
it.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Adam's forever grateful. I love Ben's vocals on this too. I think I read in the book where he feels his vocals are. I love his vocals on these songs.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
He's
it's
a maniac.
extreme, very unique voice, and just a commanding stage presence, and then off the stage, like one of the most pleasant, nice guys you'll ever meet. Very amicable.
I was at a basically it was a in memory of Martin Streak. So 10 years after his passing, there was an event at the Opera House, and I was recording from the lobby, so people would come in and they would pay tribute to the late great Martin Streak. And I finished the recording. I was there like 3 hours recording. It's still in the feed if somebody wants to dig it up. It's freaking amazing, actually. But I'm packing up because I'm going to bike it home and it's way out east or whatever. And then I see Strombo shows up and he's got Ben with him. And I had a little chat, and he seemed like a very pleasant man who will one day make his Toronto Mike debut. But we should kind of disclose. I feel like it's a bit of a conflict of interest that never seems to be talked about. But George, of course, racking up plays for the song on 102.1 The Edge, but Ben's working at CFNY and working pretty closely with Strombo.
Yeah, well, Ben notoriously didn't talk about his band when he worked there because he didn't want to come off as like corny or like an opportunist.
Yeah. He didn't want to just be like, here's my CD,
George,
here's my
meanwhile,
CD.
is playing the hell out of the songs, like for his buddy Ben. It's good music. I'm not saying that it's because it was just because it was his buddy Ben, but I mean that is an interesting conflict.
Well, and I think that's something that any music broadcaster or critic is going to stumble upon, where like their friends make good music. I think it's pretty easy to separate, music by good friends and good music by friends.
Yeah.
Right, and this is good music here. But shout out to Hawksley Workman, who's been over here, and he sat down, and I played for him Anger is Beauty, which is a Hawksley Workman song I quite like. And he talked about how he knew he was cooked. He knew he was fucked when he heard on 102.1 The Edge a new song by a band out of Streetsville, Ontario here, named Billy Talent, and Try Honesty, which we just listened to. And he said, okay, he felt he was blown out of the water by how hard that song, how heavy that song was. That's Hawksley's opinion.
I mean, yeah, people have tried to fact check us because we talk about how Try Honesty was one of the first songs, if not the first song, that put screaming on the radio.
I copied that quote. I'll read it because I actually did want to bring it up because the quote was, I think Strombo has the quote, "Nobody was getting that heavy on the radio," was the quote. Right. And I don't know because, I mean, The Offspring, I mean, there's other songs, I think, but what would you say? You were going to say something about that. Do you think that's true? That
I mean, by that point, nu metal's a huge thing, right? So Slipknot's got like a number one or number two
Wait and
album.
Bleed was fucking heavy.
But was that on mainstream rock radio?
Not really.
No, and Korn and System of a Down, like these were getting play on MTV, and these were big bands.
System of a
but
Down is a good one.
Korn's heavy. Korn still doesn't really scream. There's Jonathan Davis is predominantly singing. Same with System of a Down, and on mainstream radio, like that was more MTV stuff or Fuse TV, or Much Loud and stuff like that. On the radio, yeah, until Billy Talent came along with Try Honesty, like that was pretty much as heavy as it gets. We can split hairs. We can go, there might be, but definitely at the very least one of the heaviest things on mainstream radio at the time.
Yeah, and definitely a tide shift for sure.
Do you guys know Skye Wallace?
Yes, yes, I do.
So she was here like a week ago. She has a new single. She's going through this like pregnant iced tea era. It's kind of an interesting thing she's going through because she's very pregnant. That's a weird way to say it. But we were talking. I'm trying to. What was that thread from? Oh yeah, I played for her Tracy Bonham's Mother Mother, okay, which was played all the time I heard it all the time on Edge 102 back in like the mid 90s or whatever. Mother Mother is the name of the song, and the big refrain goes, everything's fine. But Tracy's screaming the fuck out of that song. I'm just saying, there's a song with some yelling in it that got a lot of airplay. But I guess the spirit of something that heavy played that often on mainstream media, Try Honesty, may have helped open the doors for people like Alexisonfire.
Yeah. And also, I mean, Strombo knows you got to go a little hyperbolic if you want to get people talking.
Yeah. And I mean, this was the premise of Billy Talent is really, the kind of wave of post-hardcore stuff of the late 90s. Fugazi, Refused, At the Drive-In. This was that, but just a little more polished, a little more accessible to be on the radio, to be on mainstream platforms. And that's exactly what, like, you listen to Try Honesty, that's exactly what it is.
Right. And then The X and River Below, and I mean, there's so many of these songs have melody, they're you can kind of groove to them, but they're still heavy.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, Ben's voice separates the band from anything that anything else really in the mainstream, because that voice is a snarl, it's got shades of Sex Pistols or something like that.
Mm-hmm. But also Ian Dessa, the guitarist, and we got to shout him out. He came to our launch party at the Rivoli a couple of weeks ago. He was our special guest, so yeah,
that's amazing.
And he hung out, and we blew it. So in the book there are photos. There's an 8-page photo section, and we'd blown up some of the photos just as little display in the Rivoli. It might still be there. And he was like, it was like he was leading a museum tour and pointing out all the different things in the jam space to people who were walking by.
Oh, that's good.
But anyway, I bring up Ian because his guitar sound as well. I mean, he's combining the rhythm and the lead. There's only one guitarist in Billy Talent, and it's always shocking to think about. Mm-hmm. And I think that really adds to the sound as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, without a doubt here. Now, they were Pez before they were Billy Talent.
Mm-hmm. For several years, and they had put an album out, and then got served a cease and desist from another band in the U.S. called Pez that owned the trademark to that name.
The cease and desist would come from who owns Pez. Right? Like,
well, different spelling.
Yeah, you got to add a letter, take a letter. Which
Plus
is why,
trademark law, different categories of products or services.
So when they called themselves Billy Talent after the hardcore logo basis, they took an L away.
I noticed that. Okay, so I wanted to talk. Yeah, hardcore logo. Great fucking movie, too, Hugh Dillon. That's a great movie, Hardcore Logo. I think that's fantastic. And they took away an L. Billy Talent's a character in Keith Rennie Callum.
Keith Rennie.
You know what?
Yeah, close.
Wow, I was so freaking close there. Wow. One point I want to make about Billy Talent before I shout out a couple of partners and then wrap up a bit here. But I just want to shout out Germany. Germans love David Hasselhoff, and Germans love Billy Talent.
It's wild how massive Billy Talent is in Germany.
Yeah. We asked them point blank, just like, are you bigger in Canada or are you bigger in Germany? Because we know how big they are in Canada. They're huge. They're playing,
they headlined Edge Fests.
Yeah, summer festival season. There's just crowds as far as the eyes can see. Ben, without a doubt, he said Germany. Way bigger in Germany.
That's wild.
They're massive shows that they're playing in there. Yeah.
Like, I was at Downsview Park for an Edge Fest where the closer was Billy Talent, and I don't know how many people were there, but it looked like 40,000 people were there. I don't know. And they're bigger in Germany, which I think will be a mind blow for some people.
Yeah, and that story is told in quite some detail in the book. And another point of pride, and I think that's probably the first time that story has been really told in full.
Yeah, we found their German label and tour reps, and we hunted them down, got them on a Zoom call, and we heard the full story, and that's all in Too Deep.
On that note, I bet you, only because I do a much smaller scale, but I'll talk to somebody and they'll mention somebody, and then I'll kind of put in the work to track that person down to either corroborate the story, or they'll tell it in great detail and they'll introduce a new part of the story, and then you'll go find that person and get them on to kind of confirm. Like, it's thrilling. Like, I get this adrenaline rush. Like, it's so exciting. Living precariously through you two gentlemen, I think writing this book and connecting these dots and stuff, that must have been fun.
Yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. It was exciting to come across a new thing that just like opened the story, gave us so much more story to tell. And then we would, maybe have, through one interview, we would have 3 or 4 or 5 more people to get in touch with and build the story around that.
It's like The Wire when Lester Freeman has the pictures on the wall and how all the pieces matter. It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, the hardest part was stopping, saying, okay, we can't talk to, the concert promoter in Munich. We just can't do that. We gotta move on. We gotta write another chapter.
Yeah, and by the time we did almost all of those kind of interviews with people in the band's camps and their friends and former managers, label people and whatnot before we actually spoke to the artists in most cases. So by the time we spoke to them, we knew the story. Yeah. Cover to cover, and it was filling in with details and their own memories and stuff like that. So, and I think some of them were kind of surprised at how much we already knew, which I think as a researcher...
Are they surprised by how passionate you are about the minutiae of this story?
I'd say so. We got an email from Cone, the bassist of Sum 41. He was like, when he read the chapter, the Sum 41 chapter of the book, and he said it was surprising to him that, that it's like worthy of this type of attention. But he's like, but it's cool. He's very complimentary toward us. And yeah, it was just, when he was living it, he didn't realize that people would care this much.
A lot of humility with these artists too, which was a big through
Canadian.
line. That,
exactly.
Yeah. And people spoke of that, the other people in those camps that we
if I look at the list, I believe all of these artists still live in Canada.
Fefe Dobson at least was in Nashville at one point. Some of the Sum 41, Derek is in...
He's in
California.
Vegas now.
Oh, it's Vegas.
I believe he's
I
now in Vegas.
Once again. Okay.
Yeah.
So is this singer of Silverstein. About a year ago, he moved to Vegas. He had just moved when we interviewed him, so maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, some of the Simple Plan guys are in California, but Cone is in Toronto. Billy Talent, mostly Toronto.
Yeah, they're all in Toronto.
Alexis, Wade's in Montreal now, apparently.
Right.
Yeah,
he was on CFNY for a while as a DJ.
Yeah. But yeah, I think some, they come and go, but they're all...
It's hard in Canada, unfortunately, to stay here and to make a living making your art. There's just more opportunity in the States, and I hate it. I hate that that's true, and I would love to hope that we can use this kind of cultural moment we're having to invest in Canadian arts and culture.
I agree 100%. And you're right. There are artists like Joni Mitchell and Neil Young, and we can go back where they had to go to the States. But then you have artists like Anne Murray, who lives here, and the Guess Who guys live here. Randy lives here, and Burden lives here. And so there are examples of big global bands that we've created where they've decided to stay put. But Shania didn't stay here, and I don't know which of Celine's houses she's living in now, but I don't know if she stayed there. By the way, Celine Dion's personal entertainment lawyer for years and years and years is a guy named Paul Farberman, who will be at TMLX 19 on Thursday because he now manages Snow. So it's more connections for you right there here. Okay, so I want to say hello to Al Grego, who will also be at TMLX 19 because Al hosts a wonderful podcast from Marianas called Yes, We Are Open. He went to Regina, Saskatchewan. I noticed there's no bands from Regina on your list here. We're missing a bunch of provinces, actually, but we'll get to that in a minute.
No East Coast either.
Yeah, right. Okay, so you got a couple of BC, you got one Quebec, and everything else is Ontario.
Yeah, 6 of 9, Ontario.
Yeah, 6 of 9. Okay, so Al went to Regina to get inspiring stories from small business owners for Yes, We Are Open. Season 8 just dropped. I urge you to subscribe and listen, and while you're doing that, subscribe to Building Toronto's Skyline from Nick Iones, where we have very interesting conversations. We're going to record a couple of new episodes on Friday morning. Thank you to Nick Iones and Fusion Corp for fueling the real talk on Toronto Mike. And last but not least, before I kick out this banger, I urge you to go to recyclemyelectronics.ca if you have any old cables, old devices, old electronics. Don't throw that in the garbage because the chemicals end up in our landfill. Go to recyclemyelectronics.ca, put in your postal code, and find out where you can drop that off to be properly recycled. This could be anywhere in the world, but it's actually St. Catharines, Ontario. Alexisonfire.
Someone at the book launch party at the Rivoli that we mentioned, it was last weekend, we had live band karaoke, and someone did this song. And we were signing books at the time, and I'm so sad that I missed it because I really want to. Apparently he
Doing
killed
both
it.
parts?
Both parts.
Yeah, that's
and
tough.
apparently he killed it. I asked, and they were like, this guy must have been like in a band or something because like he knew what he was doing and he could handle himself.
Yeah, we saw them do a bit of it at sound check because I think he was the sound guy. And so he like went up a little bit, but yeah, apparently with him going whole hog was amazing. And I'm so sad we missed it. One of the first times a song must have been done in karaoke. But yeah, live band karaoke.
But we all maybe I shouldn't make assumptions. I think this is the best Alexisonfire song.
This is certainly my favorite. Like, this is the one that introduced me to them. I mean, Adam and I, like, we're 2 years apart, and we grew up in a time where I think you can tell someone's age to the year based on which Alexis album is their big one. Because for me, I'm born in '93. This is my big one.
Yeah, and mine was the one from this album was Crisis from 2006. My big album was Watch Out from 2004, and I'm 2 years older than you. So there you go. I mean, if we were to draw a line between like best versus favorite, I could get behind this being the best Alexis song because it's just like it's got that thing, you know, that makes it a quote unquote hit. I have my own favorites, but yeah, this song is definitely have that kind of X factor to it.
Accidents is probably up there for me. It could be.
Yep.
But
How big did Alexisonfire get beyond the Great White North here?
So, in a similar case as Billy Talent, not that big in America, but the world is a big, wide place, and they got bigger in places like Australia and the UK and Europe, particularly I think in Australia and UK. You know, like when they play now, they play massive crowds in the UK and in Australia. So, yeah, they got big there, whereas you know. Others will get big, and you know, Silverstein, for example, was who we'll get to in a bit, was a big band in America.
Well, let's bring, you know what? I think this is the first time I went out of order.
Yeah.
And I know I went out of order, and I didn't. I kind of meant to, only because this is my blind spot. So let's speak for a moment. So Silverstein's from Burlington, Ontario.
Yeah.
To me, that's Rainbow Butt Monkeys and the Spoons. Okay. We have a third. Okay. Can you? How did I miss Silverstein? Like, was I just too old and it wasn't my scene? I guess that happens to a lot of people.
You know, it's funny because of the 9 bands that we profiled, Silverstein I didn't listen to until we were researching the book. Adam was the one who said they need their own chapter.
They're a very big, like if you look at their Spotify monthly listeners, which is an imperfect metric to judge a band size, but it's what we have, right? They're really big, you know. But
I can't, like.
You might not think it.
I mean, I read the book, but I couldn't have named a Silverstein song. Like, I couldn't have named one.
So they're a band that got really big through the underground. Like, they weren't on much music. They weren't on the radio for whatever reason. They signed to an American hardcore label, Victory Records, that was big as hardcore gets at the time. And so they, through touring like crazy, through being on Warped Tour, through all these kind of underground and MySpace, YouTube, all these channels, they got really huge over the last, 10, 20 years.
I think that's exactly how you create a blind spot for me, is if, and I'm thinking of at this era, if you're not on much music and you're not on 102.1 The Edge, I might not hear you.
Mm-hmm. There were many people who wouldn't like, they weren't in the places, if you weren't into emo, screamo, hardcore music, you would have had to go looking for them. So if you weren't into that, you probably wouldn't have found them. But there were a lot of teenagers who were into that, like me, and they found them that way. Yeah. And so they got this huge following just out of that.
But Silverstein had no pop crossover. You know, Alexis had Dallas Green. Ben would sing. Ian's guitar lines are very melodic. Silverstein doesn't really have that sense of melody, which is why they're huge in American hardcore, but they did not cross over the way that every other artist did.
Good point about these crossover from Alexisonfire, because Dallas Good had Save Your Scissors. I think that was the name of the song, but it was like Dallas Green. Who did I call him? Dallas Good? Oh, the late great. Okay, oh my goodness. Okay, Dallas Green, he's living in Nashville still, right?
Dallas Green was here.
Did we get him back? And Lee Miller from Much Music?
Yeah.
I'm not sure where he is, actually.
Well, because Lee Miller had a store in Toronto at some point. It was like a pandemic, like as emerging from lockdown venture.
Jeez.
Yeah, as far as I knew, Dallas is in
Yeah.
Toronto.
Okay, well, Dallas could be anywhere in the world. We'll just say that.
Well done.
Thank you. That's why I've got a award-winning podcast, which hasn't won an award yet. But okay, so where was I going? Oh yeah, so Dallas Green completely had, like, I would say, parents taking their kids to soccer games in the minivan are listening to Save Your Scissors, like, and that great song. I love that song he did with Gord Downey.
Mm-hmm. Sleeping Sickness.
Sleeping Sickness. I thought that was an amazing song. Big Gord Downey head over here. But I guess Silverstein didn't have a similar, crossover thing that would draw you in.
Yeah, I mean, to counter what you said, like they definitely have the melodies and kind of like a pop punk side to them, but they also they come from like emo and like metal and hardcore and those the convergence of all those things that were happening at the time. So
Right.
they really appealed to that underground kind of and that Warped Tour crowd.
But this does beg the question, when you two were sketching out this book and stuff, was there an artist one of you felt belonged, the other one just vetoed? Like, so obviously it sounds to me like, Adam, you said Silverstein belongs, and of course there was quickly Matt said, okay, I can buy into let's do it. But was there any artist where you guys simply couldn't come to terms on that?
I don't think so.
I don't think so,
Our
no.
collaborative partnership was like way more seamless than I think anyone ever really could have predicted.
Yeah, it was great, and I don't think there were there wasn't anything like that. And the Silverstein, it was really just look at the numbers. Like they were a major band, and the numbers don't lie. Like they're
They were in the
band.
news recently because there was the airplane crash in, I think it was in California, but Silverstein kind of was mentioned in that news report.
Yeah, because it was their booking agent who passed away.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
kind of
I
sad.
think Billy Talent as well. There was another band from the book. I remember it was Silverstein and one other.
Mm-hmm.
It's terrible.
Yeah. The one thing Adam and I couldn't agree on for the book that we just had to leave was the chapter titles. That was the one thing where we just had different visions, and we decided we're just going to name them after
What were the
artists.
visions?
I'll
tell you who was right.
I mean, mine was a little more of that like academic style. Like you start with like a song title or a lyric, and then it'd be like I don't know, smashed into pieces, like how Silverstein broke the mold or whatever.
Yeah, a little more creative and a little more academic essay title style,
Which is my background.
And we just we ended up just playing it pretty straight.
Like, did you think that was too cool for school?
I generally prefer simplicity and just simple. Like to me, it was like chapter 1, Gob. Like that's fine for me. And we also were like, we have spent so much time on this, and we're like at deadline of draft 2 or whatever.
Right.
We do not have the energy to like get the perfect chapter titles at this point.
Yeah.
So I think that had a lot to do with it.
Yeah,
too.
finding 9 that fit the formula that were all really good was really hard, especially with how exhausted we were at that point. So we just dropped it. But anyway, as far as disagreements go,
I think that
everything
was
was
about it.
very cut and dry with us.
And we talked earlier about that excitement, that adrenaline rush when you make contact with somebody to corroborate a story. Like I've experienced this many times when there's a person I need to talk to who was there for this to connect that. And they declined my request. So did you have that where somebody you really, really wanted to talk to simply wasn't going to talk to you?
I mean, Derek Wibley was a non-starter. We, through management, they never returned our messages. We only got to talk with Cone and with Steve, the former drummer of Sum 41, through my good friend Menno from Colorado.
Who was here last? Well, him and Brendan Canning did this event at the Garrison, tragically hip covers for the
I missed that.
for the food bank. Yeah, it was like a bookie tribute as well.
Oh, cool.
For Dave Bookman. And so Canning and Menno came over back to back to talk about that event and more. But yeah, Menno.
Yeah, so he's
a sweetheart.
Yeah, and so Colorado has toured with Sum 41, and so when I was telling him at an Exclaim party a couple of years ago, we're writing this book, and he said, well, I'm buddies with Cone, and so he hooked us up.
Amazing.
We do also have a Broken Social Scene connection, but not
Yeah.
Brendan Canning. Kevin Drew really helped us out. His brother, Cameron Drew, works in the publishing industry, and he was the one who told us to go with to query House of Anansi Press, which we did, and then they bit and published the book, and so... anyway, some Toronto indie rock.
I'm getting some secondhand excitement from
Toronto indie rock
So
connections.
you mentioned, there's 2 bands I'm going to throw at you. One is The Salads. Do you guys remember The Salads?
Yes. Big Shiny Tunes 8.
Okay.
Get loose.
I've done a couple of deep dives on Big Shiny. Mark Teo wrote a book on Big
of
Shiny
course.
Tunes, so I've had him on to talk
One
about
of the first
Big
music writers I met when I just started at Exclaim. We went to Quebec City together in 2013. Great guy.
Do you know the legend that is Cam Gordon? Does this name mean
No,
anything to you?
no.
Okay, poor Cam. Don't worry, I'll fix it in post, Cam. I'll edit that out so it won't be embarrassing for you. Just kidding. I don't
That's
edit
all
anything
right.
in post. The salad. I feel like the
Nothing wrong with
salads.
not knowing stuff.
Right. The salads may have been like our gob. I feel like I don't know what happened to the salads, but they were played so often on 102.1 The Edge. I don't think Get Loose was one. They had a couple of big jams, but anyway, I'm just throwing it out there for no particular reason.
Ian brought up the salads, and a bit of a blank spot for me. And again, don't edit that one out either. It's all right.
Look, I can't be the only one on this damn podcast with so many blind spots. Include one blind spot I have is grade. Okay, now. What is grade? Like, okay, only they're in the context of Silverstein. I feel like this is an Adam question, but I took a note on the word grade. Does grade mean anything to you regarding Burlington Silverstein? If not, I'm going to just chat up about Fefe.
I mean, they were the band that, the kind of big brother band of Silverstein, the band that set the mold that Silverstein wanted to be. And they set their sights like, if we can have the career that Grade has had and to make music like Grade, will be considered successful. And then of course they went far beyond that in terms of the reach and the like success that they had. But yeah, Silverstein as a Burlington band, like Grade were a few years older than them, and they're like, we want to be like Grade because they are this like highly respected hardcore band from Burlington, signed to one of our favorite labels, Victory Records, and we want to just do exactly that. And I mean, for Silverstein's case, like they did pretty much exactly that.
Right.
But then, they just took the ball and ran with it so much further.
What's your favorite Silverstein song? So later I can go listen to it.
Mine is Smashed into Pieces.
Yeah, mine too.
It's
okay.
It feels like an easy answer,
All
but
right.
I think it's the correct answer.
Quick word on Scarborough, home of the Robbie, Fefe Dobson. Fefe Dobson I saw at an Edge Fest once at Molson Park in Barrie. I remember. Bye Bye Boyfriend was a big song on 102.1 at the time. So, but Fefe made the cut. I'm glad she made the cut. And I wonder if you could speak maybe about the role of Prozac.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
Yeah,
and we actually got to talk with Jay Lavigne, one of the members of Prozac.
And they were Philosopher King, the right guys who did the side project, which are, you guys might remember the cartoon characters.
Simon and Milo.
Bad Disease was one,
Yeah.
and It Sucks to Be You.
Yeah.
What a wild time to be alive. But what role does Prozac play in the development of young Fefe Dobson?
So one day Prozac was in their studio just messing around trying to make a song for a Disney Channel original movie, and then they hear from the studio over this young woman singing at the top of her lungs and just crushing it. And so they went over, they knock on the door to the studio, they say, hey, who are you? We're recording a song, you want to do some backup vocals? And so Fefe Dobson was backup vocals for a Prozac song. And so then that's how they met, and that was the most fun Fefe had. Fefe had a similar experience to Avril, where she was being, told to sound a certain way because she was a young girl, not just a young girl, but a young black girl, and said, okay, you can only do pop and R&B. And she grew up listening to like Silverchair was one of her big artists growing up.
Tomorrow.
Exactly.
And she was big into the Sex Pistols as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, so she linked up with Prozac. And when she was decided not to go with the record label that was funding the session that got her in that studio that Prozac overheard, she then linked up with Prozac, and the rest is history.
I feel like Canadian rock is more open to people of color. This is a wild take, only based on the fact that they're Billy Talent, Sum 41. We have Fefe Dobson,
Julian
here,
Taylor,
he's been over wonderful, and also I'm thinking Danny Graves from The Watchmen is a person of color. Like, I mean, these are all fantastic. We don't really have the same preconceived notion that your rock band is white. And I say that Living Color, I just saw that was the anniversary of when Vernon Reid came on Toronto Mike, and we talked about it. And there's a great rock band, and there are people of color in that band. But it just feels like Canada, we might be, because of how multicultural we are as a mosaic, it might be easier for a person of color to be in rock and roll here.
Well, and there is obviously, unfortunately, a lot of institutionalized racism in Canada. But I have some friends who, they're Canadian and they moved to the States recently, and they live in Boston, and they were just talking about how just racialized the neighborhoods are in a way that, like, it is just different than living in Canada. We have our problems here, but it is just way worse in the States and way more segregated in just every possible conceivable way.
As to white guys, I don't think we can speak necessarily to, you know, the lived experiences of these people and whether, you know, what kind of challenges they faced or any sort of comments they got or anything like that. But it did, we did notice, especially early on when we were talking about the type of bands that would be in this book, that several of them were people of color particularly in a scene, that punk rock, hardcore scene, very white. And you got Ian DeSaw, Dave Brownsound, and Fefe Dobson as major parts of the book, who were, you know, were people of color existing in this very white scene. And so, yeah, it led me to wonder, because of the format of the book, we didn't get to explore it as much as we maybe would have liked, but it made me curious, like, whether that visibility on, if, you know, seeing a person of color just like rocking out in a hardcore or in a punk band on Much Music, would have been influential to, you know, young people of color, saying like, I did speak to this band called Meet Me at the Altar, 3 young women of color who are in a pop punk band now, and they definitely had that experience of like seeing people of color in this scene and being like, I could do this now. So
and when like
they're not Canadian, but you know, especially in Canada, I think with those major artists, I wonder if there were, you know, kind of further reaching impacts of that visibility.
Yeah, but even when like Willow Smith and SZA and Olivia Rodrigo made pop punk influenced songs, they all cited Fefe Dobson.
Mm-hmm.
These are major American pop artists.
And I loved your book for bringing home the Prozac fun fact too. Like that I'm there for the Prozac right there. Awesome. Okay, so we're wrapping up here. I will just say that I was lucky enough to have a visit from Josh Ramsey from Marianas Trench, who came over, and we had a great chat. And of course, all my annoying questions are about "Call Me Maybe." Like it's like, you know.
Yeah.
But Marianas Trench also from Vancouver, right? There's a Vancouver band. Maybe speak to does Nickelback play a role in the origin story of Marianas Trench?
Yes. So Marianas Trench were the second artist to sign to 604 Records.
Can I guess the first? And I did read was it Default?
Close.
No.
Close.
The other one that sounds like Theory of a Dead Man?
That's it.
There we
Okay,
go.
There you go.
They're so similar, right?
Yeah.
Like, what was up with that? They were looking for like cover bands almost, but they had good jam.
And people called them Theory of a Nickelback.
Yeah. I mean, that was again a whole movement where a bunch of artists that are similar sounding get big because that's what people want right now. But also because Chad Kroeger was involved in Default and in Theory of a Dead Man, you know, like helping to lift them once Nickelback blew up, and he had the ability to kind of go to bat for some other artists that he liked. He would produce demos and help fund sessions for these artists, and that's how, you know, linking up with his lawyer Jonathan Simkin, that's how they ended up with 604 Records. And you know, the first band they signed is Theory of a Dead Man, which is very predictable, but the next one, Chad, Trench. You know, and Jonathan said like Chad didn't really get it. He didn't really get Marianas Trench, but Jonathan, the other co-founder of 604 Records, was like, nah, just trust me.
Yeah. Marianas Trench's manager to this day.
Yeah.
Amazing. Goodness gracious. And I will say that as I look at where these people are from, we touched on this earlier, but you got a couple from British Columbia and you have one from Quebec. But other than Phoebe Dobson, who's actually from Scarborough, which is, of course, in the great city of Toronto, it seems like these artists are coming out of like 905 and even maybe, I don't know if it's 613. What is Napanee? But basically you got Ajax, Napanee, Mississauga, Burlington, and St. Catharines. Like, only one of the bands you covered is actually from Toronto proper, which is just an interesting observation.
Yeah, like a lot of suburbs, and I think that was the case. Like Matt has spoken about this a lot with a lot of these of this type of music. There were different things happening in the suburbs than there were in like downtown city centers, and I think it also led to a particular type of attitude of just like kids with nothing else to do for fun but but make music in their basements, and that's the origin story for a lot of these artists.
And suburbs lead to more hybridized music scenes where the punk kids and the hip hop kids and the metal kids can't go to different venues because they don't exist and there aren't enough of them. So where unlike a city like Toronto or kind of any, I think, big American suburb, and so they're all hanging out, and that's where it gets to a band like Sum 41 because they were exposed to all that stuff. Because who else in Ajax was, if one band liked hip hop in Ajax, then everyone heard them.
And that's how you get Ill Scarlet.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Ill Scarlet. I mean, Nothing Special is a huge song for me, and that's why we
and
did
Heaters
the sidebars.
too. Like, there was a bunch of big jams from Ill. I thought they would be like people comparing them to Sublime, obviously. Like, oh yeah, but I thought they'd be bigger.
Yeah, I mean, us too. And that's why we have all the sidebars throughout the book, was those were the artists that were on Much Music in equal measure to Sum 41 and Simple Plan, but didn't take off outside of Canada for whatever reason.
Yeah, there's like 20-something sidebars that we subtitled Further Listening. Just the ones that got, maybe got a brief stint on a major label deal, or, were big in their own, big in the underground scene, but didn't get to the point of like a Silverstein, for example. Like Comeback Kid is a really big hardcore band, very influential. But
and like Fucked Up too, like huge band. I mean,
Polaris Prize.
Yeah,
Boys Night
absolutely. But didn't quite hit the size of the 9 artists we featured.
Propaganda.
Yeah, huge.
Of course. In Too Deep, when Canadian punks took over the world. Adam Feibel and Matt Bobkin. I loved this chat.
Oh my God.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so did we.
This was so much fun.
Don't leave without your beer. That was no joke. I just got to grab it from around the corner. And then we'll take a photo by Toronto Tree. Most recent episode of Toronto Mike featured Toronto Tree, but Toronto Tree can't talk. So we got a professor to speak on Toronto Tree's behalf. You'll have to hear that one to believe it.
Oh, that's cool. I see the vision.
Yeah, you got to. Yeah.
I've seen the photo. I believe it.
Yeah, the real deal. And that brings us to the end of our 1718th show. Go to torontomike.com for all your Toronto Mike needs. Much love to all who made this possible. Again, that's Great Lakes Brewery. They're hosting us Thursday. Get there, 6 to 9. Everyone's invited. No ticket required. You can eat palma pasta and drink Great Lakes beer. Maneras, much love to you for your support. Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. Snow's going to be there. He's an ambassador for Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. RecycleMyElectronics.ca, Building Toronto Skyline, and Ridley Funeral Home. See you tomorrow, and my guest is Blue Rodeo guitarist Colin Cripps. He's in the basement. He wasn't in this book. We'll talk to you all then.